Hi, welcome to Paris Container Days. I'm Rob Richardson. Let's dig into ASP.NET Core in containers on .NET 5. Now here's the part where I tell you I'm definitely going to post the slides, but in this talk, there are no slides. It is all live demos. Now you can get the code that we're about to build on GitHub at robrich Docker in Windows Containers, or an easier way is to come here to robrich.org, click here on Presentations, and here's ASP.NET Core and Containers on .NET 5. You can click through to the GitHub repository. The code is online right now. While you're here on robrich.org, click on About Me, and you'll get here, and we can look at some of the things that I've done recently. I'm a Microsoft MVP, a friend of Redgate, a developer advocate for Cyril, and AZ GiveCamp is really cool. AZ GiveCamp brings volunteer developers together with charities to build free software. We start Friday after work. Sunday afternoon, we deliver that completed software back to the charities. Sleep is optional, caffeine provided. If you're in Phoenix, come join us for the next AZ GiveCamp. Or if you'd like a GiveCamp here in Paris or wherever you're connecting from, hit me up on email or on Twitter, and let's get a GiveCamp in your neighborhood too. Some of the other things that I've done, I do a lot of Docker and Kubernetes training. And one of the things I'm particularly proud of, I replied to a .NET Rocks podcast episode. They read my comment on the air. And they sent me a mug. Woohoo! So there's my coveted .NET Rocks mug. So let's dig in. We want to build this code. Now, right now, we have an empty folder. Let's go build this up. Now, we're going to do it twice. In our first example, we're going to do more of a brownfield experiment where we have an existing project and we need to add Docker to it. And then in our next example, we'll use Visual Studio to scaffold out some of these pieces. Let's create a new project, and we'll create an ASP.NET Core web app. And let's put it in this folder. We'll call this NetApp1, and Web Application 1 is perfect. Now, I'm going to choose to uncheck Enable Docker in this case because I want to be able to build all of this content manually. We'll come back to enabling Docker in a bit. Now, we'll create this project, and every .NET website probably has a companion .NET Windows service, so let's build that next. Our website is scaffolding into place. This is exciting. Creating the project. Now we've got our website and it's getting ready to go. Let's build up the Windows service. Now we'll come here and we will add a new project. And in this new project, we will search for worker. Now this is new in .NET Core where we have a worker service template. Now, unlike traditional Windows services, this worker service is cross-platform, which is perfect. I'll set it inside this NetApp1 folder. I'll call it worker service 1, and we will uncheck Enable Docker again. Let's create this project. Now, we've got our website and our worker service, and we want to containerize those. Well, if I have a traditional Windows service, I may need to come in here and undo the pieces associated with making it launch without all of the ceremony of starting up a service. I want it to run as a console app. Now, in this case, the worker service template is built exactly for that, so I don't need to make any changes. Here in my worker service, I have a task that will run every second and console output when the task is done. So let's create a new file. I want to add a new file. And we don't have a Docker file in here. So let's look for a text file. And let's go grab this text file and we'll call this Docker file. Now, it's important that this file be named Dockerfile and not dockerfile.txt. It looks like Visual Studio started helping. Dockerfile.txt. Yes, I do want to rename it. Next, I want to add a new item, and this will be a .dockerignore file. .dockerignore. Now, this .dockerignore file is not that unlike a gitignore file. These are all of the things that I don't want to end up in my container. Bin, obj star.user star.suo. In my production container, I don't want to end up with appsettings.development.json, so let's add that, appsettings.development.json. And we could ignore other things. We'll find in our website, we have this launchsettings.json file that is all of the details that we need to be able to start and run and debug our application inside Visual Studio. Let's ignore that one as well. Launchsettings.json. Okay, now let's come back to this Docker file. Now I need a Docker file. I need to start with a from where I'm leveraging content. Let's go to Docker Hub. We'll search for .NET and we'll land here on the .NET meta repository. Now this one doesn't actually include any images, but it links to many of them. Samples is great where you can look at lots of different kinds of Docker files that we'll be able to build and run in different environments. Runtime deps is all of the things that .NET needs to be able to run. On top of that, we'll have runtime that will include all of the details to run console applications. Now we'll want to do that for our Windows service. We'll want to run inside the console, but first we want to build. On top of runtime is ASP.NET, where we have all of the web content, and on top of that is the SDK. Let's open up the SDK. Now here in the SDK, we have our tag, our name, so let's copy that. We'll come back inside Visual Studio and we'll paste that. That is our base image. So we'll start there with our build tools in place, and now we can run all of the .NET commands. Well, first thing, let's copy all of our source code from our current directory where we run the docker build command into the current directory in our container. Now, where is that container? Where is that directory? Let's create a workdir/src that will copy all of that content into place. Okay, now I need to run some various .NET commands. I will do a .NET restore, .NET build, I'll build in release mode, .NET test, I'll also test in release mode so it won't rebuild. And in this case, because we're building this console app, let's output to the dist folder. Now, let's switch our workdir to /dist, and cmd will start up our application, .NET, and worker service.dll. Now this will work great. We could start this right away, but there's some additional things that we could do to make this better. Right now we have our source code and our build tools inside of our production container. We really want to take advantage of this lighter weight runtime container. So let's pop this one open and let's go grab the image name for this one. Here we go. We've got that image name, and let's split this in half. Let's say from this. Now in this case, I'm going to change the workdir to app, and now we need to copy in the content from the dist folder into this current folder. Now right now it would look on our host machine for that dist folder. It's not here, it's in this other build container. So let's say from equals build. Now, where is build? Let's name this one as build. Now, what we've done now is separate this into our build container and our production runtime container. Production runtime container. In our production runtime container, we only have the bare minimum content that we need to be able to run. And then in our build container, we have all of the build tools and our source code, and we'll just set those aside. Now there is one more thing that we can do to optimize this. Right now I'm copying the content and then restoring my NuGet packages. That means if ever there's a change in my source code, I will restore my NuGet packages. Really, I want to do that first. I want to restore my NuGet packages and then copy in the content. Well, we still do need to copy in our manifest. So let's copy worker service.csproj into the current folder. And then we'll run .NET restore. Well, actually, let's turn it into a Docker command. We will run it, and we will run this one. And now we will copy in our manifest, then restore our NuGet packages, then copy in everything else, and then build, test, and finally flip over into our production container. That's perfect. We've got a Docker file that's ready to go. Now let's take that Docker file and that Docker ignore file, and let's copy it into our website. Here's our web application 1. Not sure what this extra folder is. Let's delete that. Now that we've got our Docker file and our Docker ignore file inside of our website, oh, I didn't do that correctly. Let's go grab the Docker file and the Docker ignore file and copy those and paste them over here in our website. There we go. Now we've got the Docker file and the Docker ignore file. The Docker ignore file is already ready to go. The Docker file we need to adjust a little bit because now we're not running a console application, we're running a website. So let's switch this a little bit. This is web application 1. I'll copy in web application 1.csproj, and we also have one more step where we need to run .NET publish -c release -o dist. Now this is that publish step. If I was inside Visual Studio and I said right-click publish, that's exactly what this is doing, but this is doing it inside of a build file that will do it identically every time. That's perfect. So now we've got our Docker file and our Docker ignore file in both projects. Let's turn those into Docker images. So I'm here in the folder. Let's get into NetApp1. Let's go into worker service. Actually, let's go into web application 1 and let's Docker build. I'll tag this right away as web application 1, and I will build in the current folder. Now this is going to do all of those steps that we identified in our build file. It's going to restore all of our NuGet packages. Then it's going to build our project. Let's see, do we have any typos in our build? Any source code that is out of whack or anything that we need to adjust? Let's see. It looks good so far. Go! Yes, we've got our build succeeding. Let's run all of our tests. Any failed tests? Well, we don't have any tests in this project, so no failures. Now let's publish it. We're grabbing all of our CS HTML files, all of our JavaScript and HTML, and packaging it all together with our DLLs that we built previously. Now if we do a Docker image list, we can see that web application 1 was built moments ago. There we go, 14 seconds ago. Let's start it. Docker run. Now I'm going to run in detached or daemon mode, and let's forward in ports 80. We'll forward port 80 from our local machine into port 80 for the container. Web application 1. Well, maybe I've got something else running on port 80, so let's go to port 8080 on our local machine, forwarded into port 80 in the container. Now, because I ran in daemon mode, it just hands me the ID of the container, and we know that that container is running. Let's run our Windows service as well. We'll go into our worker service, and we will Docker build -t worker service 1. We'll build in the current directory. Ooh. Worker service, I have a typo in my Docker file. Good thing that didn't move any further. It's actually worker service 1, and that ensures that we don't get containers that aren't working. Okay, so let's go rebuild it again. Now we're going to do that same process. We will restore our NuGet packages and then do our Docker build, run all of our tests, and if there are any failing tests, our Docker file will stop and we won't go any further. Then finally, we'll copy that into our production container and be able to start that in Docker. Okay, so it looks like our build succeeded. That's great. Our test succeeded, and we've got a new container. Okay, so let's Docker run that image. Let's run worker service 1. Worker service 1. Now, in this case, I'm not running it in detached or daemon mode, so the console output will go straight to my machine. Looks like every second it's firing up that worker service to be able to process that content. And let's come here to localhost 8080, and we'll be able to take a look at our website. Localhost 8080. Ooh. Docker container list. Looks like our website might be having some issues. Ooh. Docker container list. It exited. Let's take a look at the logs. Docker logs. And we will go rebuild and restart this container. Ah, yes. When we flipped over to our production container, we weren't using our ASP.NET website. Now let's do that. Cool. Docker build. Actually, let's get into the correct folder. Here's web application 1. Docker build -t web application 1, and I will build in the current folder. Now, I changed some of the things about the process, but much of this content can be cached. So we didn't need to restore our NuGet packages. We only needed to start with that build command. Now let's build our site and run our tests, finally publish our content, and start up a new container. Meanwhile, our web service, our worker service, is running along and everything looks great. It looks like our build has succeeded. We don't have any failing tests, and we're going to publish our content into that new container. Okay, we've got our image ready to go, our web application 1 image. Docker container list. Now we do have this other one bound to port 80, or port 8080. So when we run this one, Docker run -p, let's go from 8081 to port 80, and we'll run web application 1, and now we've got that site ready to go. Great. So we've got our website running, and now if we come back here to our browser, localhost 8081, and here's our website. It's running. That's perfect. Now I'm going to stop the worker service, and let's flip over to Windows containers. Now if we come right here into our whale, we can switch to Windows containers, and it will warn us, are you sure? Yes. Containers. Now, it might be possible that we need to adjust our Docker file to be able to build on Windows versus Linux, but in this case, our Docker file is identical. All of the steps that we did are exactly the same between Windows and Linux. So let's build it again. I'm going to come in here to our website, and we will say Docker build -t web application 1, and I will build in the current folder. Now it's going to do those exact same processes. It will restore all of our NuGet packages, and then do a Docker .NET build, building in release mode. It will run all of our tests, and it will finally publish this content, copying that content into the new image. So let's do a .NET restore. We've got our NuGet packages ready to go. So now it's looking at the packages it needs to restore. Let's restore those packages. Is this going to work? Go, 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 go. Okay, so we've got our NuGet packages restored. That is cool. Now let's flip over and do a .NET build. The .NET build will go through all of our website and validate that the code works as expected. So here's that .NET build. Do we have any typos in our application? If we had any typos, then it would stop building here, and we would need to fix our code and continue on. It wouldn't build a real website. That's perfect. So it looks like our build is running. Do we have any typos in our website? Go, 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 go. It looks like it's going to work out well. Oh, it restored our NuGet packages again. That's that line. How's our website looking? Is it going to build successfully? Let's see. Yes. No warnings, no errors. That is perfect. Now let's run all of our tests. In this case, there are no tests in this project, so it looks like it might succeed. Let's run our tests. And in this case, all of our tests passed. Perfect. Now let's flip over and do a .NET publish. This will publish our content as if collecting all of the details for IIS, but in this case, we'll run it into a container. We'll go grab all of our CSS, JavaScript files, all of our built DLLs, all of our Razor files, and it will publish those into the dist folder. Perfect. So we're doing that .NET publish, and this will get all of that content into the dist folder, flipping over into our new image. We will then copy that dist folder into place, and we will have this new website ready to go inside of Windows containers in the same way that we ran it inside of Linux containers. So we're looking at all of the projects that all of the content that we need to publish. We already have our DLLs, so we'll just copy those into place. And now we've got our application ready to go. Docker image list, and here's that website that we just built, web application 1. Okay, let's start it. Docker run -p. Now, we had something on 8081. That's our Linux website. So let's start this on 8082, and we'll forward that to port 80. We'll start this web application, and now we have our Linux application running over here, and we have our Windows application running over here. So it may take it a minute for that website to start up, but to JIT the first time, but now we've got that website ready to go. So let's go to localhost 8082, and we will see the website running on Windows. Now it's still running on Linux, so if we come back in here to 8081 and refresh, it works just fine. 8082 works just fine as well. That was cool. Now let's stop this. Docker container list, Docker container rm. Now I can remove it based on the name or based on the ID. I'll grab the ID in this case, and I'm going to remove it and stop it at the same time. Docker container list, and we see that we have no more content. Let's flip back over to Linux mode and remove the content in Linux as well. Yes, I would like mode. Now it says it takes a while, but since it was already running, I bet it's already up. Yep, Docker container rm-f. Let's remove this one. Docker container rm-f. Now I only need to make it unique. So you notice I didn't copy all of the characters. In this case, E1, E5 is probably sufficient, and it will delete that as well. Docker container rm. Let's remove this one as well. Docker container list. And we see that all of those containers are gone. Perfect. So using a brownfield type of technology, we could build up all of these Docker and Docker Compose files inside of Visual Studio to build a really elegant solution. Now, let's see what we can do in a greenfield-like environment. What if we use Visual Studio's tools to help us? Let's create a new project. Now I'm going to come in here into my existing list, and I'll grab the ASP.NET website. Now in this case, I will put it in Net Core 2 folder. Nope, Net App 2 folder. And let's put it in this correct spot. And Web Application 1 is perfect. I'm going to choose to enable Docker in this case, and it will prompt me, do I want to do this on Windows or Linux? Now we saw how the Docker file isn't really all that different between Windows and Linux, so, well, sure, Linux. Internally, that's choosing how it maps volumes and things, but ultimately, the Docker file is pretty much identical. Now, if we pop open this Docker file, we can see that it's a little bit more confusing than the other Docker file. They have the as base, build, publish, final. Yeah, it's got a lot of phases going on. We could probably simplify this quite a bit and get back to the simplicity of the Docker file that we had previously, but this one will work. Similarly, with a Docker ignore file, they ignore a lot more things. And so maybe this is much more comprehensive. Our list was able to accomplish the needs that we had. Now let's add our worker service. Add new project. I can grab this from my list of existing things, worker service, and I'll set it in place in this one. And I'm going to uncheck this again. Let's see if we can scaffold out the content inside of our Visual Studio experience. So we'll right click on this project and we will say add Docker support. Now again, it's going to prompt us Linux or Windows. We saw how that choice is really not all that helpful, but that gets us there. And now we have that Docker file and the Docker ignore file. Now this Docker file does specify the details, and it's a smidge more confusing than I would like, all else being equal, but it gets it done. Now let's add a Docker Compose file. I'll right click on my web application and I will add a new, I'll add container orchestrator support. Now if we're going to Kubernetes, we can use Helm to be able to scaffold out a chart that works for our project. Let's switch over to Docker Compose as we debug. Now it's going to prompt us. We're on Linux mode, so that's perfect. And it will bring up this new project. Now this new project doesn't get its own folder. It's just a CS proj, or in this case, a Docker proj that allows us to use this Docker Compose file. Let's pop open this Docker Compose file and we can see that it's listed that application. Let's include the worker service into the Docker Compose file. We'll add container orchestrator support. We'll choose Docker Compose, and it pops the new project into this Docker Compose file as well. Now notice that the Docker Compose is the startup project. I'm going to right click and I'm going to say set as startup project. And now we know that that's the one that's going to run. It will run our Docker Compose. Okay, so let's open up our worker service and let's set a breakpoint here inside of our worker service. Let's open up our website and set a breakpoint, not in the error page, but in the index page. Let's set a breakpoint right here. And now we can start up both the website and the worker service in a single thing. Now notice it's running real Docker commands. These aren't Visual Studio Docker commands. These are real Docker commands. Here's a Docker exec looking for an existing container that it needs to remove. Now once it's got that into place, it's going to go build that content. Now it's not building it on my local machine, but rather it's running the Docker Compose build command to be able to get that content into place. Now once I've got that content built, it will run a Docker Compose start or Docker Compose up to be able to get that content into place. So we can see all of that console output from BuildKit, from Docker, building both of my applications. That's perfect. Now it does take a little bit to build it the first time, but because we leveraged our caching inside of our layers, next time it will start up much faster. Okay, so now it's ready to go. Now in this case, it didn't just use the Docker Compose file, but it used also this Docker Compose override file that added a few more details. Like it will go grab our user secrets so that we can use HTTPS inside of our Docker containers as well. Now we'll need to do this a little bit differently in production. We'll probably put this in our Kubernetes ingress in production, but in development, it's nice to be able to get our local developer secrets and set them into our Docker container as well. We hit our first breakpoint inside of our Windows service. And here in our Windows service, we can take a look at all of the variables, much like we would in any application as we're debugging. We get the normal debug experience. I'm going to remove this breakpoint and push go. And let's see if we get to, we got our breakpoint inside of our website as well. Now we just hit breakpoints inside of containers in two different projects. That was really cool. Here's our website. It started up. And we still have HTTPS, and we're on a unique port. That's perfect. Now, one more piece that is really exceptional inside of this container, or inside Visual Studio, we have a great way to visualize our Docker environment. Here's the list of containers that I have running. Here's that website. Here's the worker service. Here's the web application one that it started up before I added the compose file. Now, here in this web application one, we can take a look at the ports, There's the port that it started up. We can also take a look at the volumes, and we can take a look at the files inside of that container as well. Now, this can be a great way to be able to audit the container and understand the content running in it. Now, unfortunately, this content is pretty small, but it is perfect for being able to look at environment variables and all of the details associated with this content. Now I'm going to hit stop to stop debugging, and it will then take down all of those containers that it spun up to be able to debug my site. Now, whether you create your own Docker files and Docker ignore files, or whether you use the scaffolded ones, you're able to build and run containers inside of Visual Studio really easily. You can grab the code for this session up on GitHub at github.com/robrich/Docker in Windows containers. And join me for Q&A in that spot where the conference has designated. Or if you're watching this later, hit me up on Twitter at rob_rich, or email me by clicking on the link from robrich.org. Thanks for joining us at Paris Container Day. This was so much fun.